Part 3. Growing up in Catholic school between stints of amusing myself with haunted houses and cemeteries, I attended Sacred Heart Catholic School. Like many children my age, I never fully understood the concept of God. I thought God was a nice man with a beard who loved us, but if we did something wrong, he would hate us and we would burn in hell as punishment. A bit scary to a small child, don't you think? I remembered times when I sat in church and looked up at the mural above the altar. It was a beautiful, pristine picture of Jesus smiling down upon the world. I remember thinking, how could someone like this make you burn in hell? Another thing we were taught was that if we said prayers, God would hear them and answer them. Well, I don't ever remember any of my prayers being answered. I couldn't understand this concept at all. As a child I would constantly ask questions about God but they were seldom answered. When they were, the answers did not satisfy the original questions, and instead produced more questions. For instance, the nuns at school talking to Heaven 23 dressed in black habits accentuated with a white wimple. The first time I laid my eyes on the nuns in those habits, I was frightened to go to school. Those women did not look like my picture of the wives of God, especially dressed all in black. When I asked, "Why do you wear black?" they had no reply. From an early age I had an awareness of heaven. Although I envisioned heaven with its pearly gates, winged angels, and so forth, I also knew it was more than that. I knew that when we went to heaven, we would see all of our friends and family who died before us. The nuns agreed that we would meet our loved ones in heaven, but they explained them away as souls. I never understood what a soul was. I knew people lived in heaven, but if people lived in heaven, where were their souls? Was their soul a part of them? Again, such questions baffled the nuns. Unfortunately, their standard reply was to be quiet and don't ask so many questions. To which they added, one day you'll find out where these souls go, and then you'll wish you hadn't asked such a question. I guess they meant that I would find out when I died. I remember an incident in second grade that made me question God even more. I didn't have the right colored pencil for a lesson, so Sister Matilda slapped me so hard that I went flying to the floor and lost a moment of consciousness. James Van Praagh 24 when first sat back in my seat, she was already on the other side of the room. It was obvious that she had little concern for my welfare. I was only 7 years old at the time. I remember thinking, why did she hit me? I didn't hurt anyone. I didn't do anything bad. How could someone who talks about loving one another, someone who is married to God, treat me this way? So, from a very young age, my faith and trust in the Catholic Church soon became a delicate balance between what was preached and what was demonstrated. I remained dubious. I stayed in Catholic school because of my strong, Irish Catholic mother. She attended Mass every day and insisted it was the only way to heaven. When I asked her about other religions, she just referred to them as those heathens. According to the Catholic Church, the Catholic faith is the one true religion. I didn't want to be a heathen, or burn in hell, so I remained at Sacred Heart, but I felt skeptical of those big ladies who looked a lot like penguins. In hindsight, I can understand why the nuns were so abusive to children, and why some, not all, of the priests became alcoholics, child molesters, or had affairs. I believe it is very difficult, and somewhat inhuman, to live in a state of grace all the time. Please, we are only human. There are, of course, some who are able to live such an austere talking to Heaven 25 lifestyle, and all the better for them. For the majority, however, it must be impossible. No wonder there has been an enormous drop in enrollment in seminaries and novitiates. The Catholic Church has an extremely archaic belief system. In many ways, it has the mindset of the 15th century. Life is ever changing and evolving. What was true for our ancestors may no longer apply to us. We continually grow and expand as beings on the earth. Instead of labeling each other according to religious beliefs, we need to see each other as one and the same. I am not saying religion is a bad thing. Quite the contrary. If most of us practiced the ideals of the religions we follow, this world would certainly be a much happier place to live. No one would be gunned down on a neighborhood street or killed in a war. No one would go hungry or be homeless. Unfortunately, I believe the leaders of religions are more interested in gaining power here on earth than preparing their flocks for salvation. Seminary life was not for me. After 8 years at Sacred Heart Grade School, I attended IMAD Preparatory Seminary in Hyde Park, New York. Becoming a priest was my mother's idea, not mine. But I had always wanted to get James Van Praagh 26 away from my hometown, and I saw this opportunity as my chance. The seminary experience was very difficult for me. It was the first time I had been away from home, and I was homesick. Moreover, I felt abandoned. I was 14 years old and very depressed. Fortunately for me, I discovered that many of the other boys were going through a similar emotional adjustment. If there is one thing the Catholic Church teaches well, it is that common suffering is a great unifier. Eventually, we all got used to it. In the seminary, I returned once again to an orderly and disciplined environment. Being sensitive, I often picked up frustrations from the priests and brothers. I felt that most of them would have preferred a secular lifestyle, but for whatever reason, they gave their lives to God. When I was a seminary student, I, too, wanted to give my life over to God, but I did not want to become a priest or brother because the lifestyle was too confining. I also felt unsure about the ideas expressed in Mass as being the absolute truth. Besides, as in grammar school, I was not satisfied that my religion was entirely about God. There seemed to be too many rules and regulations and not enough demonstration of the Word of God in the world. The only consistent act was the collection of monetary offerings. Talking to Heaven 27 in my first year at the seminary, I often thought about my questions concerning God. I always kept such thoughts to myself because I was afraid everyone would think I was nuts. Often while sitting through Mass I would meditate on the idea, who or what is God? When I did, the experience of the outstretched hand surrounded in light came to mind. I thought, was it the same hand that brought me through Catholic school? Was it the same hand that steered me to the seminary? The more I questioned, the more unsure I felt about my religion. Why weren't these questions being answered? It wouldn't be too much longer before I finally found out. It happened during Easter week, and specifically on Good Friday. All the artifacts on the altar had been removed, and any remaining statues, crosses, and the like had been covered with cloth. The monstrance had been placed at a side altar. A monstrance is a very tall, gold, ornate cross that contains the consecrated hosts, or wafers, that represent the body of Christ. All the students took turns meditating in front of the monstrance. We had no set prayers, so we relied totally on what we felt. Each student knelt or sat for 30 minutes at a time during the entire weekend. When I sat there on Good Friday, it was probably the very first time I felt a sense of God since the experience of the hand. I sat in that small room star James Van Praagh 28ing at this incredible gold piece of art adorned in flowers. I kept staring at it, and after 20 minutes, I became aware that God was inside the room. Not a literal figure standing beside me, but a feeling of peace and tranquility inside me. It was the exact feeling I had when I was 8 years of age. Once again, I felt it was the proof for which I was searching, the proof that God was alive. I knew it wasn't the host in front of me. It was much greater than that. It was inside me. It spoke in my heart, not words, but feelings of an incredible love that God had for me and of which I was a part. I understood then that this feeling of God was not just to be found in a seminary or church but everywhere and in everything. God is unlimited. I finally had an answer and knew this was the reason why I was in the seminary. I had to take this sense of God with me. From that day on, I never questioned the existence of God. I just had to look in my own heart to see God. After that experience, I never felt obligated to finish seminary. I knew there was nothing left to learn there. For if the teachers meant to prepare me to understand the presence of God, then they succeeded. I realized that God was a part of me and all that I do. God was love and non-judgment, understanding and compromise, justice and honesty. I realized that we all had God inside ourselves. Talking to Heaven 29 life in the seminary taught me many things, and in retrospect I am grateful for having had the experience. I discovered my own sense of self that previously had been lacking. I was forced to deal with others and recognize the good and bad in them. Ironically, the seminary also helped me to realize that Catholicism was not for me. I found something much richer and deeper to believe in: God. It was not the God who sat on a throne in heaven or the Son of God who hung on a cross. It was the God of love that resided in me. After my findings, I realized that I could not continue to worship a God encumbered by church rules that were outdated and fickle. I could no longer believe in a mythology that centered on guilt and punishment. I still find it a bit unbelievable that the Catholic Church teaches this stuff. Please don't get me wrong. Everyone is entitled to believe the way he or she sees fit. I am just referring to my own background. Communication with the other side. I left the seminary after my first year and spent the next 3 years in a New York City public high school. I moved out of the house once again when I entered San Francisco State College to major in James Van Praagh 30 broadcasting. I dreamed of a career as a screenwriter. As luck would have it, while coordinating a conference with the creative staff of Hill Street Blues, I became friendly with one of the show's producers. When I told him I would be graduating soon, he offered what I thought was my first big break. I'll never forget those magic words: "Call me when you get to LA. We can probably put you on the show as a production assistant." A production assistant. Suddenly, my life was on a roll. After graduation, I wasted little time when I returned to New York. I bought a car, packed my gear, and headed west. I rolled into Los Angeles on July 7, 1982. At last I was in the major leagues. I made it to Hollywood. I vowed that I would not leave Tinseltown until I realized my dream and became a writer. I called my friend, the producer, to let him know I was ready to begin my new life. He was not available. I survived as a temp until I worked my way full-time into the basement of the William Morris Agency. I had the glamorous responsibility of pulling staples out of files that were being prepared for microfiche. I spent most of my time daydreaming about being a famous screenwriter and living the glamorous life. Even though my present situation was not my dream job, I had the strangest sensation in the pit of my stomach that it was talking to heaven 31 important for me to stay where I was. Very soon, I knew why. One day, my supervisor, Carol Shoemaker, and I were discussing metaphysics. She had an appointment to see a medium named Brian Hurst. "Do you want to come with me?" she asked. I had no idea what a medium was, but I jumped at the chance to leave the mailroom and discover something new. We arrived in Manhattan Beach a few minutes before our 7 o'clock appointment time. Maybe 7 was the witching hour after all. I felt a little nervous about the whole thing. My mind kept skipping back to the séance with Scott and Janice. I started to wonder if contacting the dead was such a good idea. I was not calmed by the smiling Englishman with the large green eyes who met us at the door. When he introduced himself, I thought he seemed a little too pleasant for his line of work. As we walked into his home, my mind raced double time, conjuring up images of demons that the sorcerer might unleash. Nonetheless, Carol and I settled into a comfortable spot on the bright orange couch. Were we ready for the ride? I wasn't so sure. Brian spent the next half hour describing what we were going to experience. He explained that he was clairaudient. He was literally able to hear Spirit James Van Praagh 32 voices in his ear. He said, "The spirit people are on a very fast vibration. They speak very quickly. Sometimes it sounds like Morse code. I get pieces of information like blips and bleeps." Upon ending this explanation, he told Carol that her father was standing in the corner of the room. "He looks like he injured his finger." Carol responded that her father had cut his finger right before he died. I was flabbergasted. How did he know this? I sat at the edge of my seat and waited to hear more. Brian continued to talk about Carol's father. There were no moving candles or tapping tables, however. 20 minutes later, Brian turned to me. He said that there was another James in spirit who gave me his love and had an interest in my life. I had no idea to whom he was referring. Later, I learned that I did have an Uncle James who had died some years back. Near the end of the session, Brian said, "You know, James, you are very mediumistic. The spirit people are telling me that one day you will give readings like this to other people. The spirits are planning to use you." I wasn't sure how to respond to this pronouncement. After all, my goals were in a completely different direction. I wasn't ready for my life to take a talking to heaven 33,180-degree turn. With some nervousness, I replied, "I have enough trouble understanding the living. Why would I want to start talking to the dead?" Brian simply
Soulmate, this is a part of Zindagi Ki Roshni consultancy. It has been established for those who have lost someone and for those who are very sad in their life. About 100 PDF books and 20 short audio books of this topic will be sent to those who join it. This data will be sent to their email or WhatsApp. If you want to join this organization, then please send WhatsApp message to this number.